my name isn't what matters. What matters is that I'm still here, and I shouldn't be. If you ever find yourself hiking through the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, pay attention to what the forest stops telling you. That silence, that absolute stillness, it's not peace. It's warning you. I didn't know that then. 10 years ago, I was a wildlife surveyor contracted by the U.S. Forest Service, a man paid to listen to what most people ignore: tracks, wind patterns, animal movement. But in 2014, the forest spoke back in a way I'll never forget. It's past midnight as I record this. The only light in this cabin comes from a kerosene lamp and the blinking red light on this old recorder. Sometimes I swear I hear something pacing the porch. Maybe it's just the wind pressing through the boards. Maybe it's not. Back then, I was assigned to a region west of Darby, near the Montana-Idaho border, a stretch of land thick with old pines, creeks that vanish underground, and valleys no one's mapped properly since the 1940s. My job was to document unusual predator behavior. Ranchers had been losing livestock for months. The carcasses weren't eaten. They were drained. Blood gone, organs intact, no signs of struggle. Coyotes don't do that. Wolves don't either. The official explanation was disease or ritual poaching. But none of the locals bought that. I remember old men at the gas station saying, "Something's walking upright again." I laughed it off then, thought it was backwoods superstition, stories told after too many beers and too many winters alone. The first night in the field was colder than I expected. I'd pitched my tent along a frozen stream under a canopy of Douglas firs. The air smelled like pine resin and wet earth. You could hear ice breaking somewhere upstream, the soft crack and sigh of the forest breathing in its sleep. It was beautiful, peaceful, until it wasn't. Around 2 a.m., the woods went dead quiet. Every cricket, every owl, every sound I'd been cataloging just vanished. If you've ever been out there, you know nature never truly stops. Even silence has layers: wind, insects, the hum of life. But this was different. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Then came the smell, metallic, wet, like blood left out in the sun. I thought maybe a deer had died nearby, or something larger had been killed by a cougar. I unzipped the tent just a little, flashlight in hand, and saw nothing but mist rolling low across the snow. But there were tracks. Fresh ones. Too big for any wolf, spaced too far apart. They started near the stream, stopped 5 feet from my tent, and just disappeared. No drag marks. No retreat. Just gone. I told myself it was the cold playing tricks on my eyes. That's what fieldwork does. Long nights, half sleep, caffeine, isolation. You start imagining movement where there's none. But then I heard it, a slow, deliberate step. Not a four-legged shuffle. A footstep. 2, then 3, circling my camp in the dark. I remember whispering, "Hey, who's there?" No answer. Only breathing, low, steady, human-like, but heavier. Like someone forcing air through their throat. The forest swallowed the sound again, and I sat there all night gripping my rifle, counting every second until dawn. When morning came, I checked the perimeter. Around my tent, the snow was disturbed in a perfect circle. Not paw prints, depressions, deep enough to mark weight, wide enough for a man's heel. Only, there were claw marks at the tips. 5 of them. I reported it to the agency, sent photos, coordinates. No reply. Instead, a week later, I got a new instruction packet. Same area. Same mission. Different wording. Do not engage. Collect data only. That's when I realized this wasn't about wolves. I didn't know it then, but the forest had been chosen, not for what lived there, but for what they'd released there decades ago. I have something to play for you. This is from that first night. I kept the recorder running by accident, left it on inside the tent. 3 days after that first night, the agency sent a follow-up order. Same coordinates, same mission, this time with a small team. They wanted confirmation of predator movement near the ranching belt west of Darby. The official line said wolves had migrated down from the Canadian border, but the evidence didn't fit. Wolves kill to eat. These kills looked like something else. I met my colleagues in a gravel lot behind a diner off Highway 93. Tyler was a biologist out of Missoula, sharp but restless, always checking his phone even out there where service barely existed. The other, June Martel, was a veteran field technician, mid-40s, calm and quiet, the kind of woman who measured her sentences like she was afraid of wasting breath. The fourth member of the team joined us later, a local game warden named Hale. He'd been in those mountains for 30 years, heavy-set, flannel shirt under his parka, the kind of man who looked carved from the same timber he patrolled. Over coffee that morning, he said something that stuck with me. You'll smell it before you see it. And when you do smell it, don't breathe deep. We loaded our gear into the truck: rifles, traps, thermal scopes, trail cams, and enough food for 5 nights. The sky had that steel gray sheen that promises snow. Pine scent cut through the diesel exhaust as we rolled up the switchbacks toward the Bitterroot line. Every mile deeper, radio static grew heavier until the voices of dispatch dissolved into nothing but hiss. By the second night, we'd set camp near a ridge overlooking a frozen meadow. The ground was laced with prints, large, padded, but wrong. The spacing was too long for any wolf. Some sets were 4-legged, then halfway across the clearing, they rose upright, the impressions deepening to a biped's weight. Tyler crouched over them, frowning. You see that? Pressure shift on the heel. Whatever this is, it's walking sometimes. June photographed the trail, marking GPS points. I noticed how the pines leaned as though the wind had come from one direction for years, shaping them toward the valley below. A thin layer of mist crept through the tree-line, smelling faintly of iron and musk. The horses refused to calm. One snapped its tether trying to pull away from the dark. That night, the forest hummed with life until, as if by command, it didn't. Hale froze mid-sentence by the fire. There it is again, he whispered. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling. Not crunching like an elk or bear, but pressing, pausing, almost testing the snow. We shone our lights into the woods. Shadows twisted between trunks, but nothing solid showed. The beam picked up steam rising from somewhere low to the ground. I thought maybe a deer's breath, but it was too tall, the mist lifting almost at eye level. Could be a man, June said quietly, hand near her pistol. Hale shook his head. No man moves like that. We stayed awake until dawn, the fire burning low, no one saying a word. When the sun finally crept through the valley, we found the cameras shredded. Not clawed, torn apart like someone had twisted them in both hands until the plastic cracked. Every SD card was missing, batteries melted from heat. By the 4th day, tension had crawled beneath our skin. Tyler started talking to himself under his breath. June kept cleaning her rifle. Hale chewed tobacco so hard his jaw trembled. We were all listening for something, though none of us could name it. That afternoon we followed a trail of blood leading uphill toward a stand of aspens. The tracks belonged to a cow elk, what was left of it. The body was collapsed but untouched by scavengers. Its throat had been opened in a single deep slice, as though by a blade. Flies shouldn't have survived the cold, yet they buzzed weakly in the air. And there, 6 feet up the trunk of the nearest tree, deep gouges clawed into the bark, clean, parallel, fresh. Hale touched one groove with a gloved hand and looked at me. No bear did this. They climb for food. This thing marked territory. We took hair samples caught on the rough bark, dark gray, almost black under sunlight, coarse as wire. June sealed them in a vial. But by nightfall, before we could label or send data, 2 men in unmarked trucks rolled into camp. They wore plain parkas and mirrored glasses, and carried themselves like soldiers trying not to look like soldiers. Federal Wildlife Containment, one said, flashing an ID too fast to read. We'll take the samples. You'll forward any remaining data through normal channels. Containment? Tyler asked. We're surveyors, not contractors. Who called you in? They didn't answer. They packed the evidence and drove away, leaving us standing in the snow with the echo of their engines fading into the trees. That night, the cold bit deeper. We built a second fire, larger this time, and took turns keeping watch. Around 2 in the morning, as the others dozed, I spotted movement across the meadow, something tall, broad-shouldered, standing between the trees. It was too far to see detail, so I raised my thermal scope. For a moment, the screen glowed empty black. Then the shape appeared, a figure outlined in red heat. Upright. Massive. Shoulders like a bull's, head tapering into a muzzle, arms too long, ending in something that flickered when it moved, claws or fingers. It took one step forward, and the scope blurred from the heat it gave off, like it was radiating warmth into the frozen air. I whispered for Hale, but he was already awake watching me, hand on his rifle. You see it too, he murmured. I didn't answer. Through the scope, the creature tilted its head slightly, like it knew I was there. Its eyes glowed faint amber, reflective like a coyote's but level with mine even across the field. Then, just as suddenly, it dropped to all fours. The motion was too fluid, too fast. One moment a man shape, the next a blur gliding low across the snow without sound. I felt something primal ignite inside me. Instinct, not reason. I flicked off the safety and fired a warning shot into the trees. The crack echoed through the valley, rolling back in waves. Silence followed. For a long moment, even the echo died. And then, behind me, close enough to feel the vibration in my chest, a growl answered. Low, deep, resonant, like thunder trying to form words. I spun around. Nothing but darkness between the tents. Tyler stumbled out, eyes wide. What was that? Get the lights, Hale barked, voice tight. We fired up the flares, one by one. Orange light washed across the clearing, painting the snow the color of blood. There were tracks everywhere, circling us, overlapping, impossible to count. Some were human-sized, others wider, deeper. At the edge of the light, something moved, just out of reach. A tall silhouette, watching. June aimed her rifle but held her fire. It's testing us, she whispered. The growl came again, this time from the opposite side. Then another, closer. 3 distinct voices, low and rumbling, speaking over one another like a pack communicating. The horses went wild, rearing, snapping their lines. We backed into a tight circle, rifles up, breathing shallow. The flares hissed and sputtered. I saw Hale glance at me, the whites of his eyes were glowing in the firelight. Hold, he muttered. Don't waste bullets unless it charges. Something heavy crashed through the brush, followed by the sound of claws raking bark. Snow rained down from the branches above us. Then, as quickly as it began, the noise stopped. Total silence again. By morning, the air around camp felt wrong, heavy, charged, as if the forest itself had seen too much and wanted us gone. Frost coated every metal surface, and the horses wouldn't stop trembling. We packed in silence, except for Tyler, who kept asking if anyone else heard that whisper during the night. None of us answered. None of us wanted to admit we had. When we radioed in to the Forest Service, the channel went dead halfway through transmission. Hale tried again from the ridge, his hands shaking over the mic. Still nothing but static. By the time we got back to base camp that evening, the first thing we noticed was the laptop. Our logs, files, and footage were gone. The hard drives were unplugged, data stripped clean. The only thing left was the faint smell of cigarette smoke, and a boot print none of us recognized pressed into the mud outside the tent flap. 2 men showed up that same afternoon in a white government truck without plates. Civilian clothes, jeans, parkas, mirrored sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. One did all the talking. We're contractors with wildlife containment, he said. His voice was even, practiced. Your incident falls under our jurisdiction now. Containment. Hale repeated, folding his arms. Never heard of that branch. The man smiled. You're not supposed to. They confiscated everything, thermal footage, hair samples, field notes, and warned us not to discuss the event outside our chain of command. When Tyler protested, the taller of the 2 stepped close enough for his shadow to swallow him whole. This is bigger than you, he said quietly. Let us handle it. The taller one's partner stayed behind after the others drove off. He lingered by the fire, watching the tree lean. His name was Miles. He was lean, weathered, with a 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd seen more than he'd been allowed to talk about. I offered him coffee. He didn't drink it, just held it to warm his hands. You're not going to write this off like the rest of them, are you? He asked finally. Write what off? I said. He looked up at me, eyes pale gray, like smoke caught in ice. You saw it. You heard it. The tracks weren't natural. You know that. I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. Miles stayed after the others left, claiming he had lingering data recovery to finish. That night, while the others slept, he pulled up an encrypted file on his tablet. Grainy photos filled the screen. Creatures with wolf heads and human torsos, all in sterile lab rooms under fluorescent lights. These are from the 70s, he said. Department of Defense project. Non-human adaptation research. The idea was to create enhanced scouts, hybrid canids trained to survive and navigate war zones where normal soldiers couldn't. I felt the ground drop out beneath me. You're saying that thing we saw was engineered? Not just one, he said. A unit. They called them Recon Class 9. Designed for night operations. Silent, scent-driven, heat-adaptive. Problem was, they didn't obey commands for long. They started turning on handlers. Whole facility in Idaho shut down after what they called an incident. Officially, they were destroyed. Unofficially, he looked toward the ridge. Some were released. Too expensive to kill, too hard to contain. The fire popped, scattering sparks into the cold. He told me he'd spent the last decade tracking migration zones, places where sightings matched the movement of these hybrids. The Bitterroots, he said, were red-marked since 1986. When I asked why no one ever came forward, he gave a dry laugh. Because no one who does lives long enough to matter. We went back to the ridge the next morning. Miles had an old Forest Service map spread across the hood of his truck. Most of it was standard terrain detail, streams, basins, survey coordinates, but one section had been marked decades ago with an X and a notation, Cave System Number 19, sealed 1974. That's where they first dropped them, Miles said.
Test containment zone.
No one's been authorized to step foot there since. It was only a few miles from our previous camp. The trail leading there wound through aspen groves and broken ridges scarred by old burns. The forest felt emptier with every step, as if even birds refused to fly overhead. We reached the mouth of the cave by afternoon. A landslide had partially sealed it, but someone, or something, had cleared a narrow entrance. The air that drifted out was thick with decay and rust. Hale stayed back with the horses, muttering he'd seen enough government ghosts for one lifetime. Miles and I went inside. Flashlights cut through damp air, beams glinting off wet stone. The walls were streaked with claw marks, deep grooves running the length of the tunnel, gouges layered over time. About 50 feet in, the passage widened into a chamber. That's where we saw the bones. They weren't scattered like an animal den. They were arranged, patterns of circles and lines, deliberate. Elk skulls facing outward. Bear femurs stacked like spines of a wall. And in the center, smaller bones, human, unmistakable. A ribcage, a skull, the jawbone cracked clean through. I knelt, shining the light over the markings carved into the stone floor. Symbols, not letters, not numbers, but shapes repeating, curling. You think this is ritual? I asked. Miles didn't answer right away. His light had fixed on something half buried in dirt, a rusted military tag, still attached to a strip of torn nylon. He brushed it off and read the name.
His lips tightened.
One of ours. What happened to him? He probably got too close. The deeper we went, the stronger the smell became. Copper, sulfur, and something sweet underneath, like rotting fruit. The air vibrated faintly, like the hum of an unseen generator. My pulse thudded in my ears. Miles moved ahead, scanning with his infrared sensor. The screen flickered with static, then flared bright red.
Movement, he said quietly. At the far end.
I killed my flashlight. The dark closed in around us, almost liquid. From somewhere deep within the tunnel came a faint dragging sound, claws scraping stone in a slow, deliberate rhythm.
Then, silence.
Miles raised his weapon, whispering, "Back out slow." The temperature dropped so fast our breath turned to mist. The smell hit again, stronger, almost choking. And beneath it, a sound low and rhythmic. Breathing.
Close.
We stepped backward toward the entrance, our boots crunching over loose rock. The beam from my light caught something just for a heartbeat, a pair of eyes, glowing amber in the dark, unblinking.
Go, Miles hissed.
The growl that followed shook dust from the ceiling. It wasn't animal, too deep, too controlled. The flashlight flickered and went dead. In the pitch black, the sound of claws came again, faster now, scraping closer. I stumbled, caught myself on the rock wall. Then, from somewhere beyond the darkness, came a voice, not human, not entirely animal either, dragging each syllable through a throat that wasn't built for words.
It said my name. Not shouted. Whispered.
Like it had been practicing. Miles fired once into the dark, the muzzle flash revealing only the curve of something massive retreating into shadow. The echo rolled for what felt like forever before fading into silence again. We didn't speak as we ran out of the cave, stumbling into daylight.
Hale was gone.
The horses were gone too, their tracks leading downslope toward the river. Miles bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. "Now you understand," he said. "It's not just a creature. It remembers."